I was raised by a woman who never wanted me, and I only found out now. This is one of the most heartbreaking stories you'll ever hear about maternal rejection and a devastating family discovery. Prepare yourself for an emotional journey that might forever change how you see family. My name is Emily Collins. I'm 28 years old, and for my entire life I believed that my mother, Margaret Collins, loved me, despite being distant and cold. I always thought she was just someone who struggled to show affection, that her reserved personality explained the absence of hugs, kisses, and the warm words I constantly saw other moms giving their kids. I grew up for 28 years in a modest 3-bedroom house in the outskirts of Detroit, Michigan. The walls were faded blue with chipped paint. The small backyard had an old maple tree that never turned a beautiful red in the fall, and there was always a lingering smell of cheap lemon-scented disinfectant that my mom obsessively used to keep everything clean and in order. The house felt more like a boarding house than a home. We coexisted under the same roof, but emotionally, each one lived in their own world. Margaret Collins, now 52, worked my entire childhood as a janitor at a public hospital downtown. She was an average-height woman, hair always tied back in a tight bun, brown eyes that barely ever met mine, and hands roughened by years of hard labor. Her routine was like clockwork. Up at 4:30 a.m., out the door by 5:30, back home at 4 p.m., cooked a simple dinner, watched her favorite crime shows, and was asleep by 9 p.m., every single day without fail for 28 years. My father, Robert Collins, 55, was a city bus driver for the Detroit Department of Transportation. Tall, thin, with a graying mustache and hands that always smelled of diesel and metal, he left home by 5 a.m. and didn't return until 6 p.m., too exhausted to talk about anything except engine problems or annoying passengers. My whole life, our conversations consisted mostly of basic greetings, practical questions, and long, uncomfortable silences at the dinner table. I was an only child. I used to wonder why my parents never had more kids. Whenever I asked, Margaret would respond bluntly, "Kids are too much work. One's enough." That answer crushed me every single time because it confirmed this lingering feeling that I was nothing more than a burden, a responsibility they were stuck with. Growing up, I never got spontaneous hugs, bedtime kisses, or words of encouragement. Birthdays were celebrated with a store-bought cake, a cheap candle, and practical gifts like clothes or school supplies. Christmas meant a simple dinner, gifts wrapped in leftover newspaper, and no real sense of joy or warmth in the air. At school, I watched other kids get picked up by moms who smiled, asked about their day, brought snacks, and genuinely cared. Margaret would show up in silence, impatient to get home and continue her endless chores. She never asked about my grades, never attended parent-teacher conferences, and never expressed pride in anything I did. When I was 8 years old, on a rainy Tuesday afternoon in May, something happened that shattered everything I believed about my family. I was playing in the backyard when I overheard Margaret on the phone with my Aunt Caroline, her younger sister who lived in Chicago. What I heard would change the way I saw myself forever. "Caroline, I swear. This kid is so clingy," Margaret said, her voice filled with irritation. "Always wants attention, always wants to talk, wants this, wants that. Kids these days don't know how to just sit still." I froze. My heart started pounding. I quietly hid behind the maple tree, the smell of wet soil mixing with the soft sound of the rain. An eerie, perfect match for what I was about to hear. "It's not like I hate her. It's just hard, you know?" Margaret continued. "Other moms talk about this unconditional love for their kids. I've never felt that. For me, it's just an obligation." Her words hit me like a punch to the chest. At 8 years old, I didn't fully grasp what unconditional love or obligation really meant, but I knew enough to understand I was hearing something no child should ever have to hear. "Robert's not big on affection either," she went on. "I don't think either of us were meant to be parents. But what can you do? It happened. Now we've got to raise her until she's 18. Until she's 18. That phrase echoed in my mind like a death sentence. They were literally counting down the years until they could be free of me. I wasn't a loved daughter. I was a temporary responsibility, a box to be checked, a bill to be paid until it was cleared. Standing there, hidden behind the tree with the rain mixing with my tears, I finally understood why I always felt like a stranger in my own home. I understood why every little request felt like I was asking for too much. I wasn't imagining it. It was real. The woman who was supposed to love me more than anyone in the world didn't. For years after that day, I carried this secret like a heavy weight in my chest. I started noticing every tiny gesture, and everything confirmed what I had heard. Margaret fulfilled her duties like someone completing a task list. She fed me, clothed me, took me to the doctor when needed, made sure I went to school. But there was no warmth, no real curiosity about who I was, no spark of joy in my existence. When I was 12, another moment came that would cement this truth in me even deeper. We were at a routine checkup with my pediatrician, Dr. Martinez, a kind, middle-aged man who had seen me since I was a baby. He looked at my records, smiled warmly, and said, "Mrs. Collins, Emily is an exceptional kid. Straight A's, incredibly well-behaved, polite, bright. You must be so proud of her." My heart fluttered. Just hearing someone say those words filled me with a hope I didn't even know I still had. But Margaret didn't even flinch. It was like he was commenting on the weather or gas prices. "Yeah, she's always been pretty responsible. Never caused problems in school," she replied, her voice flat, detached, like she was discussing a bill or groceries. Dr. Martinez seemed taken aback by her coldness. Trying again, he added, "Emily told me she wants to be a veterinarian one day. That's a wonderful dream. With grades like hers, I'm sure she can make it happen." "Vet school's expensive," Margaret responded sharply, cutting the conversation down like a guillotine. "Hopefully she'll find something more practical." It was like she was slamming the door in my face, on my dreams, on my future, on any tiny hope that maybe, just maybe, she cared. I felt my face burn with shame and disappointment. There I was, being praised by a respected professional, and my own mother not only ignored his kind words but went as far as to dismiss my dreams right in front of someone else. It felt like being publicly rejected by the very person who was supposed to be my biggest supporter. On the way home, we walked in silence through the busy streets of downtown Detroit. The sound of honking cars, street vendors shouting, the endless movement of people. It all felt painfully loud as I tried to process what had just happened. Finally, I gathered the courage to ask, "Mom, why didn't you seem happy with what the doctor said about me?" Margaret stopped abruptly, turned to me with that familiar look of annoyance, the same one she used when I interrupted her TV shows or asked her to repeat something. "Emily, quit it. The doctor gets paid to be nice. You need to stop setting your hopes so high. Life isn't some fairy tale." Those words sank into my heart like poisoned thorns. At just 12 years old, it became painfully clear that my mother not only wasn't proud of me, she didn't believe in me, didn't care about my dreams. To her, I was an obligation she executed with technical precision but zero emotional investment. Throughout my teenage years, from 13 to 17, our relationship became even colder, more transactional. Margaret fulfilled her basic duties with the accuracy of a Swiss clock, but every attempt I made to connect emotionally was met with coldness, or outright irritation. If I came to her with problems from school, she'd say, "Figure it out. You're old enough." If I shared an academic achievement, she'd just nod, saying nothing. When I said I wanted to go to college, she let out a deep sigh. "We'll see if there's money for that." When I graduated high school at 18 with honors, and was accepted into 3 public universities for veterinary science, I thought maybe this time finally my parents would show some pride. It was an extraordinary achievement. A daughter of 2 blue-collar workers with only basic education, raised in the rougher parts of Detroit, making it into a prestigious profession solely through my own hard work and dedication. At my graduation ceremony, held in the school gym decorated with blue and white balloons and plastic flowers, I watched as other families hugged their kids, cried tears of joy, snapped endless photos. Margaret and Robert sat quietly in the audience, stone-faced as always. They were physically present, filling 2 empty seats, but emotionally they were miles away. When my name was called as class valedictorian, the highest honor reserved for the top student, I watched other moms jump to their feet, cheering, wiping tears, shouting with pride. Margaret stayed glued to her chair, scrolling through her phone like she was checking bus schedules. As I gave my speech to an audience of 500 people, talking about dreams, dedication, and the future, I scanned the crowd, searching for her eyes. When I finally spotted her, she was glancing at her wristwatch, clearly calculating how much longer she had to stay. After the ceremony, while other families gathered for pictures, made dinner reservations, and showered their kids with praise, my parents simply said, Let's go. We've got work in the morning. There was no celebration. No special dinner. No recognition of the incredible achievement I had reached completely on my own. During my 4 years of college, my life became a relentless grind. Physically and emotionally exhausting, but my only way to build a different future. I attended classes from 7 a.m. to 11 a.m., worked part-time from 2 p.m. to 6 p.m. to pay my bills, and interned at veterinary clinics on weekends. It was a marathon that drained me, but also filled me with purpose and hope. Margaret never once asked what classes I was taking, never showed interest in my internships, never wanted to meet any of my classmates who sometimes picked me up from home. I was treated like a tenant who happened to live there, paid rent on time and didn't cause trouble. Nothing more. At 22, after graduating with academic honors and landing a job at a respected animal clinic in Ann Arbor, I finally decided to move out. I rented a tiny studio apartment in an old building in the Carytown district. $200 a month, nearly my entire starting salary, but the emotional freedom it gave me was priceless. On moving day, as I carried my few belongings, clothes, books, a mattress, a couple of second-hand furniture pieces I'd saved up for, Margaret watched from the kitchen window with the same detached expression she used when watching the trash truck drive by. She didn't offer to help. She didn't ask if I'd be okay. She didn't show any hint of sadness or worry about me living alone in an expensive city. When I went inside to say goodbye, all she said was, "Don't screw it up," like I was some distant acquaintance heading off on a road trip, not her daughter leaving home for the first time. For the next 6 years, from 22 to 28, I built a life that finally gave me some stability and fulfillment. I worked tirelessly, specialized in veterinary surgery, built a strong professional reputation, and became a respected vet in Ann Arbor. Contact with my family was reduced to occasional Sunday phone calls, 10-minute conversations max. I'd ask how they were, they'd ask if I was eating okay, and then we'd sit in awkward silence. Holiday visits were formal, uncomfortable obligations. We'd spend a couple of hours together, struggling to find anything to talk about. Margaret never asked about my job in detail, never cared about my personal life, never expressed that she missed me or was proud of anything I accomplished. It felt like I was a former neighbor she tolerated out of basic social obligation, not the daughter she had raised for 28 years. When I was 26, I bought my first home, a modest 2-bedroom condo in a quiet neighborhood near downtown Ann Arbor. It was the result of years of brutal saving and sacrifice. When I called to share the news, hoping for even the tiniest flicker of pride or joy, her response was as predictable as it was crushing. "Well, good for you, Emily. Guess you've got your own place now."
No celebration. No joy.
No recognition of what that milestone meant. It was like telling someone you switched shampoo brands. And then at 28 on a Saturday morning in March 2024, everything changed. I received an unexpected phone call from my Aunt Caroline, the same aunt I hadn't spoken to in years. Her voice was shaky, strained, like she'd either been crying or was desperately trying not to. "Emily, sweetheart, I really need to talk to you. Can you come to Chicago today? It's about your mother. About the family. There are things you need to know. Things you should have known a long time ago," she said, her voice trembling with an urgency that made my chest tighten with dread and confusion. During the hour-and-a-half drive from Ann Arbor to Chicago, cruising down I-94 on a sunny morning that felt brutally out of sync with the darkness building in my chest, my mind raced through every terrifying possibility. Maybe Margaret was sick and hadn't told me. Maybe they were in serious financial trouble. Maybe my dad had lost his job and they were drowning in debt. Any of those scenarios would be difficult, but I was prepared to help however I could. Despite all the coldness, despite the emotional distance, they had raised me for 28 years. They gave me food, shelter, and education. I felt I had a moral responsibility to be there for them if things got bad. Aunt Caroline's house sat on a quiet street in a suburban neighborhood on the south side of Chicago. It was a modest but well-kept home, with a small, colorful garden in the front and a sky-blue iron gate that creaked slightly as it opened. Caroline, a warm, kind-looking woman of 48, her features similar to Margaret's but softened by years of kindness rather than tension, greeted me with a hug that lasted longer than any embrace I'd ever received from my own mother. "Come on in, Emily. Do you want some coffee? Juice? Something to eat? You must be tired after the drive, she said, her hands trembling slightly as she led me into her living room, modestly furnished but impeccably cared for. Tia, Aunt Caroline. What's going on? You're really scaring me, I asked, sitting down on a floral couch, scanning her face for answers for clues. She sat down across from me, took a deep breath like someone about to jump off a cliff, and then said the words that shattered my entire reality. Emily, sweetheart. Margaret isn't your biological mother. I am. I'm your real mother. Margaret raised you because I couldn't keep you when you were born. The world stopped. Completely. The sound of cars outside vanished. The ticking clock on the wall turned into a distant echo. I felt like I was falling into a deep, black hole where nothing made sense, where the laws of physics and reality had simply ceased to exist. What do you mean? I managed to whisper. My voice felt thin and hollow, like it was being carried underwater. You're my biological daughter, Emily. I was 20 when I got pregnant with you. I had no job, no money, no way to raise a child. Margaret, already married to Robert for 3 years and struggling with infertility, offered to raise you as her own. The tears began falling before I even realized it. My body reacted faster than my brain could process. 28 years of my life were being rewritten in a single sentence. 28 years of wondering why I was never truly loved, explained all at once in one devastating truth. Why? Why didn't anyone ever tell me? Why did you all hide this from me my entire life? I asked, my voice rising, trembling with a mix of disbelief, betrayal, and panic I didn't even know existed inside me. Caroline began crying too, wiping her face with a crumpled tissue pulled from her pocket. Her hand shook so badly she could barely hold it. Because Margaret asked me never to tell you. She thought it was better. That it would be less confusing, less traumatic for you to believe she was your real mom. And you agreed to that? My voice was sharper now, laced with an anger that had been quietly brewing my entire life, now finally bursting free like a dam breaking. Emily, I was a scared 20-year-old. No job, no support. Our parents had died in a car accident 2 years before. I had nobody. Margaret seemed like salvation. She said she could give you everything I couldn't. A home, stability, education, security. It felt like the right thing at the time, she sobbed. But I always felt she didn't love me. My entire life I wondered why my own mother was so cold, so distant, why I always felt like an outsider in my own home. I shouted, years of confusion, pain, and loneliness exploding out of me all at once. Caroline covered her face with her hands, her shoulders shaking with guilt. I know. I always knew Margaret couldn't love you the way a mother should. But I convinced myself that at least you had a roof over your head. Food. A school. A chance. A better life than what I could have given you back then. A better life? I repeated, stunned, pacing toward the window. Aunt, I don't even know what to call you right now. Do you have any idea what it was like growing up feeling like a burden? Like I was something people just tolerated? That I was an obligation. Call me Mom, she whispered. Because that's what I've always been in my heart. Even if I couldn't be there the way I should have. Did you ever talk to her about it? About how obvious it was that she couldn't love me? I asked, desperate to piece together the full truth. I did. A few times, she nodded. When you were little, I'd ask how you were doing. And she'd always say things like, "Oh, Emily's a handful. Clingy. Always wanting attention." I tried to suggest, maybe you just needed more love. More hugs. More patience. But she'd get defensive. Angry. She'd tell me I didn't know anything about raising kids. What followed was a 4-hour conversation full of painful revelations. Caroline showed me pictures from when she was pregnant with me. Photos of her smiling, her hands gently cradling her belly in a way I had never seen Margaret do in any picture with me. She showed me the original birth certificate. Her name was listed as my mother. She pulled out old letters she had written to me over the years but never sent. And then, a journal. A thick tear-stained diary filled with years of entries about me. Her worries. Her regrets. Her hopes. Her heartbreak at watching me grow up from a distance. Emily. Not a single day went by where I didn't think about you. I kept up with everything. Your grades, your graduation, your job, Margaret would tell me, but always like it was a chore to update me, not like she was proud of you. And my biological father? I asked, my voice shaking again, drowning under the weight of everything hitting me at once. He was a guy I was dating back then, Rodrigo Sanches. When I told him I was pregnant, he disappeared. I never heard from him again. I tried looking for him a few times, but nothing, she answered, her voice filled with the same sadness that now overwhelmed me. So, I spent 28 years being raised by a woman who never wanted me, who saw me as a favor she did for her sister, while my real mother watched from a distance silently. I said, my voice trembling with a toxic mix of rage, sadness, and weirdly relief. Emily, I know, I don't have the right to ask for your forgiveness after 28 years of lies. But you need to know, I never stopped loving you. Not for 1 second. Not a day went by that I didn't wish things had been different. Giving you to Margaret, it was the hardest thing I've ever done. And I regret it. I regret it every single day. In that moment, everything finally made sense. In the most devastating and yet somehow liberating way possible. The constant sense of rejection I'd carried my entire life. It wasn't just in my head. It was real. Margaret truly never wanted me. She raised me because of a family obligation. Because of a deal made between two sisters. A role she took on. But never ever truly wanted. The discovery explained everything. The constant coldness. The absence of affection. The lack of pride in my achievements. The impatience with my emotional needs. I wasn't paranoid. I wasn't too needy. I was a child being raised by someone who saw me as a temporary burden, a responsibility she had taken on, but one she carried out without any real emotional investment. Driving back to Ann Arbor that night, tears blurring my vision as I navigated the interstate, I felt like I was seeing my entire life through a new lens. Every painful memory of rejection suddenly made perfect sense. Every moment I'd felt like a stranger in my own home was now illuminated with brutal clarity. But along with the crushing weight of the truth, there was something else. A strange sense of relief. For 28 years I had blamed myself for not being enough. I constantly wondered what was wrong with me. Why wasn't I lovable? Why did my very existence seem to irritate the woman I called Mom? Now I knew. There was never anything wrong with me. Margaret never loved me because I was never truly her daughter. You can't force maternal love where there is no biological or emotional bond. I spent the entire following week in a fog of shock. It felt like my brain was scrambling to rewrite 28 years of my personal story with this new truth. At work, I went through the motions, performing surgeries, handling consultations, caring for animals with my usual professionalism, but inside I was spiraling. By Thursday, I knew I couldn't keep this inside. I had to confront Margaret. I couldn't go on living with this nuclear truth without facing it head-on. That morning before my shift, I called her. I tried to keep my voice steady. Margaret, I need to talk to you. In person. Tonight. It's important, I said, deliberately using her first name for the first time in my life. There was a pause. Emily, is everything okay? You sound different, she replied. There was a flicker of something in her voice, maybe worry, or maybe I was just projecting emotions that had never really been there. We'll talk in person, I said and hung up before she could ask anything else. After work, I drove from Carytown back to the house I grew up in on the outskirts of Detroit. My stomach was in knots the entire 40-minute drive. I rehearsed it over and over in my head. How do you confront someone about 28 years of lies? How do you ask someone why they pretended to be your mother when you were really just a family obligation? When I pulled into the driveway at 7:30 p.m., the scene was painfully familiar. Margaret was in the kitchen cooking dinner, just like she had been every evening for as long as I could remember. Robert was in the living room watching the evening news. Same as always, but everything felt different now. I was seeing it all through the brutal, honest lens of the truth. Hey Emily.
Come in.
I made your favorite cornbread stuffing, Margaret said, stirring something on the stove, not even turning to look at me. I need to talk to you. Something serious. Can we sit down in the living room? I said, my voice firmer than I expected. She turned, looked at me for a few seconds, and I saw her entire body tense. Something in my tone tipped her off immediately. Robert turned down the TV. sensing something was about to go down. We sat down in the same living room where so many hollow conversations and painful silences had taken place over the years. The faded brown couch, the scratched-up coffee table, the same floral curtains from my childhood. Everything looked the same, but nothing felt the same. Margaret, I began, choosing my words carefully. I talked to Caroline last Saturday. She told me something that changed everything. I watched as Margaret's face went pale instantly. Her hands, folded in her lap, began to tremble slightly. Robert leaned forward, confused but clearly picking up on the tension. She told me she's my biological mother, that you raised me. Not because I was truly your daughter, but because you were doing her a favor. The silence that followed was deafening. Robert's eyes widened, stunned. Margaret dropped her gaze to the floor, her hands now visibly shaking. "It's true," she finally whispered, barely audible. "Why?" I asked. "Why did you never tell me?" Margaret slowly raised her head and, for the first time in years, actually looked me straight in the eyes. Her eyes were red, but I couldn't tell if it was from emotion or shame. "Because we thought it was better for you. Caroline was so young. She had nothing. No job. No home. We were stable. We had a house. We could offer you a life she couldn't," she said, her voice gaining a defensive edge. "Better for everyone?" I repeated, feeling the anger rise in my chest. "Do you have any idea what it was like to grow up for 28 years feeling unloved? Feeling like a burden? Like I was just tolerated? Emily, I always took care of you. You never went without. You always had food, a roof, clothes, school," she replied, dodging the real issue entirely. "Taking care of someone isn't the same as loving them," I snapped. "A child needs more than food and a bed. A child needs love, attention, someone who cares. Can you honestly look me in the eye and tell me that you loved me? That you ever saw me as your daughter?" There was a long, agonizing silence. Margaret stared at the floor for what felt like forever. Robert sat frozen like a statue. I tried," she finally said, her voice cracking. "But it's not easy. Raising someone else's child and pretending they're your own. Then why did you do it? Why take me at all? Why didn't you let Caroline figure it out?" I asked, desperate to understand how someone could sign up for motherhood without the love that was supposed to come with it. Because she was my little sister. And she was desperate. And because I thought the love would come. I thought, if I just raised you, it would happen. But it didn't. Not the way it should have, she confessed, finally breaking down, tears sliding down her face. "It didn't," I confirmed, not as a question, as a fact.
No.
"Not the way it should have," she admitted, her voice barely a whisper now, broken. That admission, as painful as it was, brought a strange sense of validation. For 28 years I questioned myself, wondered if I was just overly sensitive, if I was imagining it, if I was asking too much. But now, I knew. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't broken. My sense of rejection wasn't imagined. It was real. And it was justified. In the weeks that followed, I started building the relationship with Caroline that should have existed my entire life. We spoke every night, long emotional phone calls where she told me stories about her pregnancy, about choosing my name, about the dreams she had for my future before realizing she couldn't raise me. "Emily, when you were born, I spent 4 days in that hospital, just staring at you," she told me one night, her voice soft but thick with emotion. "I wanted to memorize every little detail of your face. I knew I would have to give you to Margaret, but I wanted those 4 days, forever." "And how did it feel? Handing me over?" I asked, already bracing for the answer, imagining a pain I could barely comprehend. "It was the hardest day of my life," Caroline said, her voice trembling. "Margaret came to the hospital to pick you up. She already had all the paperwork ready to register you as her daughter. When I placed you in her arms, you cried so much. It was like you knew something wasn't right." In the many long, emotional conversations that followed, I learned that Caroline had married a man named Charles when she was 25. He worked as a mechanic in Chicago. They tried for years to have children but were never able to. Charles always knew about you, Caroline told me one evening over the phone. He supported me when I finally decided it was time to tell you the truth. He said it was time for me to stop carrying this guilt alone. 2 months after the revelation in May, I organized a dinner to formally meet Charles and start building a real family bond. We went to a cozy Italian restaurant in downtown Chicago, and from the very first moment, I felt something I had never felt with Robert. A true warm connection. Charles, a 50-year-old man with graying hair, rough hands from years of manual work, but eyes so gentle they almost glowed when he looked at me, greeted me with a long, sincere hug. Emily, it's an absolute honor to finally meet you. Caroline has talked about you every single day for 28 years, he said, holding my hands with a tenderness that felt both foreign and desperately needed. Over dinner, for the first time in my life, I experienced what it was like to have real family conversations. Warm, joyful, full of curiosity and care. Charles asked about my work, listened intently to my stories, laughed at my jokes, and treated me as though I was the most precious person in the world. Tell us about that tricky surgery you did last week, Caroline asked, her eyes shining with pride. I shared the story of a complicated heart surgery I performed on a golden retriever, a procedure that saved the dog's life. They listened with fascination, asked thoughtful questions, and when I finished, Charles clapped his hands. Our girl. A surgeon. Caroline, look at our daughter. She saves lives every day, he said, his voice full of pride so genuine that it brought tears to my eyes. For the first time ever, someone was truly proud of me, openly, vocally, sincerely proud. For 28 years, every success I achieved had been met with cold indifference by Margaret and Robert. Now, finally, I knew what it felt like to have parents who were proud of me simply for being me. In the months that followed, I began spending weekends in Chicago, getting to know my real family and discovering roots I never knew existed. Caroline showed me photo albums filled with family I had never met, my maternal grandparents who had passed away when I was 15, without me ever knowing they were truly my grandparents, aunts, uncles, and cousins who had always known me only as Margaret's niece, never realizing we were blood. Your grandparents asked about you all the time, Caroline said as we flipped through the worn pages of an old album. They knew the truth, but Margaret forbade them from ever telling you. My mom. She cried every time she saw you. She wanted so badly to hug you, to hold you as her granddaughter, but she had to pretend you were just someone else's child. They died without ever being able to hug me as their granddaughter? I asked, feeling a wave of pain crash over me for all the connections I had lost without ever knowing. Yes, sweetheart. They passed with broken hearts, carrying that secret, Caroline answered, her own tears falling onto the faded photographs. And then, something unexpected happened. Caroline managed to track down my biological father through social media. His name was Richard Sanders, now 50 years old, living in Indianapolis. Married. 2 kids. A successful CPA at a large accounting firm. Emily. I talked to him, Caroline told me one night, her voice trembling with emotion. When I told him about you, he cried. He said he never stopped thinking about you, that he regretted every single day, walking away. Does he want to meet me? I asked, unsure whether I was truly ready for another emotional earthquake in my life. He's desperate to meet you. He said he's dreamed of this day for 28 years. He wants to apologize. He wants to know the incredible woman you've become. 2 weeks later, on a Saturday in September, I met Richard for the first time. We agreed to meet at a quiet cafe in Indianapolis, a neutral space where neither of us would feel pressured. The moment I saw him walking toward my table, my breath caught. I recognized myself in him immediately. The height, the eyes, the shape of his jaw, even the way he walked. For the first time, I could see exactly where half of me came from. Emily? He asked softly, his voice trembling. Richard, I replied, standing to greet him. He pulled me into a hug unlike anything I had ever experienced. There were 28 years of sorrow, regret, love, and hope in that single embrace. I felt him crying softly against my shoulder. My daughter. My beautiful daughter. God, you look so much like me, he whispered, pulling back just enough to look into my eyes, his own filled with tears. For 3 hours we sat there talking about everything, about the past, about the years lost, about the futures we still had ahead of us. Richard told me how his life had changed after I was born. He married a woman named Susan when he was 26. They had 2 children, my half-siblings, Jacob 18 and Lily 15. He built a successful career in finance. My kids, they've always known about you, he told me. I told Susan from the beginning, and we told Jacob and Lily as they got older, that I had a daughter out there, someone I hadn't met, but who was always part of our family. How did they react when you told them you found me? I asked. They were overjoyed. Jacob and Lily have always wanted an older sister, Susan said. That our family finally feels whole now. In the weeks that followed, I met them all. Jacob, a mechanical engineering student, welcomed me with open arms like the little brother he'd always dreamed of having. Sis, Dad always said you were out there somewhere. I can't believe we finally get to meet you. Now I know where I get my nerdy love of science from. Lily, a spirited 15-year-old, was absolutely thrilled that her big sister was a veterinarian. Emily, will you teach me everything about animals? I think I want to be a biologist one day. And Susan, 45, a high school history teacher, embraced me like one of her own. Emily, there's always been an empty seat at this table. You were always meant to fill it. Our family is complete now. As my family grew in ways I never thought possible, so did my career. The clinic I worked at promoted me to junior partner, recognizing my dedication and skill. For the first time, I was earning enough to not only live comfortably, but to help Caroline and Charles as well. Mom, I want you and Charles to move in with me in Ann Arbor, I told Caroline one evening. I've got a big house now. You'll have your own space, total independence. But I want to take care of you, the way you would have taken care of me, if only you'd had the chance. After a lot of hesitation, Caroline and Charles finally agreed. In October, 9 months after discovering the truth, I organized a huge party to celebrate my newly found real family. I rented a beautiful event space in downtown Chicago and invited Caroline, Charles, Richard, Susan, Jacob, Lily, and every uncle, aunt, and cousin I could now officially call family. For the first time in my life, I was surrounded by people who loved me unconditionally. People who showed genuine pride in my achievements. People who treated my existence not as a burden, but as a blessing. During the party, I raised my glass and made a toast that captured the essence of my entire journey. For 28 years, I believed I wasn't good enough to be loved. Today I know. The problem was never me. The problem was that I was searching for love in the wrong places. From people who simply weren't capable of giving me what I needed. By the end of 2024, my life had completely transformed. Caroline and Charles moved into an apartment just a few floors below mine in Ann Arbor. For the first time ever, I had my real family close, ready for spontaneous dinners, warm conversations, and the kind of family life I had always dreamed of. During that time, something completely unexpected happened with Margaret. Her health began to decline, forcing a new kind of connection between us. But this time, the dynamics were entirely different. In December, Robert called me one Tuesday morning, his voice heavy with concern. Emily, Margaret collapsed at work yesterday. They took her to the hospital. The doctors are running more tests. Can you come? Despite everything, the coldness, the distance, Margaret had raised me for 28 years. Even if she had never given me the love a mother should, she had fulfilled her duties as a caregiver. I felt a moral responsibility to be there. Tests revealed that Margaret had developed type 2 diabetes and hypertension. During her hospital stay, we had the most honest conversation we had ever had in our lives. Emily, she started, locking eyes with me. I know. I was a terrible mother to you. I spent years convincing myself I was doing the best I could. But the truth is, I never managed to love you the way you deserved. And now that we don't have to pretend to be mother and daughter anymore, I want you to know, I deeply admire the woman you've become. Independent, strong, compassionate. You turned out amazing. Despite me, she told me during one of her follow-up appointments. Our relationship slowly rebuilt itself, but on entirely new terms. No more pretending. No more forced roles. We were 2 adult women, an aunt and a niece, who now shared mutual respect. The year 2025 began with a transformation, I never could have imagined. 2 years after discovering the truth about my origins, my life had become living proof that pain could be transformed into purpose, rejection into strength, and lies into liberating truths. In January, something happened that would change the course of my career forever. I received an unexpected call from the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. "Dr. Emily Collins," said Dr. Charles Mendelson, Director of National Mental Health Services, "your personal experience combined with your professional expertise gives you a unique perspective on care, healing, and identity. We would like you to lead the first federal program focused on family trauma and identity discovery in the United States." It was an extraordinary opportunity to turn my own pain into public policy that could help millions. I said yes without hesitation. It was another step in transforming my story into a lasting legacy. During that same season of professional growth, something even more unexpected happened. I met Dr. Matthew Reynolds, a 32-year-old psychologist specializing in family trauma, who had been assigned to collaborate with me on the program. Matthew was everything I had ever hoped to find in a partner: intelligent without arrogance, compassionate without condescension, someone who deeply understood the complexity of family wounds, and most importantly, someone who saw me and loved me exactly as I was. Not for what I achieved, not for how I performed, but simply for me. "Emily," he said during our third dinner together, sitting at a small, cozy restaurant in downtown Ann Arbor, "it's extraordinary how you turned your most painful experience into a force for healing. Not just for yourself, but for others. And it's equally extraordinary," I replied, smiling, "how you've dedicated your life to helping families heal, by teaching them that honesty is the foundation for everything." Our relationship grew naturally, beautifully, built on respect, mutual admiration, and most of all, a love that didn't demand performance or perfection. For the first time, I knew what it felt like to be loved simply for who I was. Then, in March of 2025, something happened that would solidify my journey from victim to national leader. I was invited to give the keynote address at the largest family psychology conference in the United States. The event was held at the McCormick Place Convention Center in Chicago, with an audience of over 3,000 mental health professionals, and broadcast live across the country. It was my chance to share my message with the world. My name is Dr. Emily Collins. I'm 29 years old, and for 28 years I believed that there was something fundamentally wrong with me, because I couldn't earn the love of the person I thought was my mother. I began standing on a stage illuminated by spotlights, looking out over a sea of faces. Today I want to share how learning the truth about my family didn't destroy me. It freed me. It became the foundation not only for my personal healing, but for public policies that are transforming how our country addresses identity, belonging, and family trauma. For the next 45 minutes, I told my story with raw, brutal honesty. You could hear a pin drop in that massive hall. And when I finished, the audience erupted into a standing ovation that lasted 5 full minutes. "Dr. Collins," said Dr. Robert Sanders, president of the American Association for Family Psychology, as he stepped onto the stage after me, "your courage in sharing your vulnerability is breaking barriers on conversations this country desperately needs to have." The impact was immediate and overwhelming. In the following days, my inbox flooded with messages from professionals eager to collaborate, parents grateful for finally having the language to talk about things they had always felt but couldn't explain, and most of all, from adults who finally felt validated in their lifelong experience of rejection and confusion. "Emily," one woman from Seattle wrote, "your speech gave me the courage to sit down with my adopted daughter and be honest with her about why our relationship has always been so difficult." Chapter that began 6 years ago with a single devastating truth. Finishing and beginning again, I reply. Because this story never really ends. Every day that Helena grows up knowing she is loved, every family our foundation helps, every person who finds the courage to seek their truth, our story keeps growing. 6 years ago, I was Emily Collins, a 28-year-old veterinarian who felt rejected by the very people who raised her. Today, I am Emily Collins Reynolds, leader of a global movement that transformed how societies address family identity, mother to a child who will never question whether she is loved, and a living example of the sweetest revenge of all, a success story that turns pain into purpose, a life That proves beyond any doubt that the truth always wins.